Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and welcome to my Luocha guide, where we're going to cover exactly how he works, how strong he is, but most importantly, his best build, rotation, light cones, Eidolons, and teams. Luocha is an imaginary abundance character with plenty of tricks up his sleeve. He's incredibly versatile and flexible, but also possesses some of the most powerful healing in the game, capable of doing the most numbers, but also the most frequent numbers, meaning he can heal very often and way more than anyone else can currently in the game, making him pretty damn powerful. One of the main things that makes Luocha special is that he scales off of his attack, and a lot of his abilities also deal damage. His ultimate and his basic attack are two things you'll be using very often, and they both break the enemy for imaginary, so you can consider him as a little bit of an honorary nihility unit with the ability to break enemies very fast. Luocha heals a lot, and he heals frequently. This is thanks to his passive healing, which he gets a lot of. A lot of it comes from his special talent Cycle of Life, a special life field he can cast on the field, which whenever an ally attacks an enemy, the entire party will be healed for a massive amount. He also has more automatic healing in his skill. Every 2 turns, he is able to use his skill for free whenever an ally goes low, and it'll be automatically cast. On top of all of this, doubling down on Luocha's Nihility Disguise, he can also remove buffs from enemies as well as dispel debuffs on your allies, making him an incredibly flexible and powerful unit to have on your account. Now you might be thinking, wow, this all sounds way too overpowered, and you'd be right, it is too overpowered, so let's understand how to push him to his limits and take things to the max. Luocha's skill is Prayer of Abyss Flower. It's a single target heal that, unlike other healers, actually scales off of his attack instead of HP. In addition to that, it also heals for an absurdly massive amount compared to other healers currently. It costs 1 skill point and generates 30 energy, and after you use it, it also grants him something called a stack of Abyss Flower, which we'll get into in a little bit here. Luocha's skill has another effect though. Whenever an ally's HP moves below 50%, he'll automatically cast his skill on them. The cool thing about this though is it doesn't cost a skill point when this happens. And you also get all of the normal effects from the skill, meaning he'll get the 30 energy and he'll also get the Abyss Flower stack, making this an incredibly powerful effect. It can trigger every 2 turns. And remember, after the 2 turns are up, even if one of your party members is below 50% HP, he'll check instantly and heal them straight away as soon as it comes off cooldown, making this an incredibly powerful effect. One of Luocha's bonus abilities, Cleansing Revival, also adds a cleanse to his skill whenever you use it or when you automatically trigger it, making it even stronger. Luocha's ultimate, Death Wish, costs 100 energy and is an AoE attack that breaks every enemy for 2 break units of imaginary toughness. In addition to that, it'll also remove 1 buff from all enemies, which is insanely powerful. Finally, it'll also grant him 1 stack of Abyss Flower on demand. Luocha's talent, Cycle of Life, is what makes him so powerful. After he reaches 2 Abyss Flower stacks, he'll consume them and deploy a special field on himself, which lasts for 2 turns. While the field is active, whenever one of your allies attacks an enemy, they will heal themselves for a massive amount. Now the only catch is, when Luocha is knocked down, he will lose the field and it will be deactivated. One thing to know about Cycle of Life though, is that you can only trigger the healing once per action, meaning if you use an AoE attack and hit 3 enemies, you're not going to heal 3 separate times. One cool thing is though that if you hit an enemy with stuff like follow-up attacks or ultimates, you will trigger it, making this talent incredibly powerful with characters like Clara or other characters with incredibly strong follow-up attacks. One thing to know about Cycle of Life though is that you can't have the field up permanently. While you have Cycle of Life active, you cannot gain any additional stacks of Abyss Flower, meaning you'll have to wait for it to run out to start gaining stacks again to reactivate it. Another one of Luocha's bonus abilities, Sanctified, turns his field into an AoE heal anytime anyone attacks. Traditionally, only the person who attacks would be healed, but with Sanctified active, the entire party gets healed every single attack, turning the heal from this ability into a massive game changer. Luocha's final bonus ability, Through the Valley, gives him a 70% chance to resist crowd control, which means he's definitely going to be tough to freeze, imprison, or entangle. battle. Luocha's technique Mercy of a Fool is a non-active technique that activates his field at the beginning of battle. When leveling up Luocha's traces, prioritize unlocking his skill and talent first and foremost alongside the Sanctified bonus ability. Those are the most important. Then prioritize going for the other bonus abilities and all of the attack boosts on these smaller traces. After that, you can focus on leveling up the ultimate and basic attack if you want to get a bit of extra damage out of him. Next up is mastering Luocha's rotation and the gameplay tricks. Whenever you're getting into a battle and it looks pretty challenging, make sure to use Luocha's technique first and foremost to gain his talent on the entry of the battle. Remember, while Luocha's field is active, you cannot gain any stacks of Abyss Flower, so you want to save up his ultimate for after the field wears off. The field will only lose one of its 2-turn duration after Luocha's turn ends. You can easily observe this by checking out his character panel here and seeing the buff. 2 turns remaining. After I use an attack here, it'll go down to 1 turn remaining. This is an incredibly important part of mastering Luocha. The name of the game when playing Luocha is to maintain his field for the highest amount of time possible, because while it's active, your team is somewhat invulnerable. Every attack you do will heal the entire team by a substantial amount, meaning that as long as you have it up, you're pretty much safe. So extending the duration of that field is priority number 1. If you could have it active the whole fight, pretty much 100% uptime, that would be insane. There's a lot of tricks which will allow you to help extend the duration of Luocha's field. Let me show you the most powerful one. If you activate Luocha's field, which normally lasts only 2 turns, when it is his turn, he can extend the duration of it by a massive amount. Right now, Luocha doesn't have his field active. You can see here that it's not present. We're going to use his ultimate on his own turn here and activate the field. Now, normally what would happen is after your turn ends, you would lose a turn on the duration of the field. So this here would go to 1 turn remaining. But when you activate the field on Luocha's own turn, that turn that you activated will not be losing a turn on the duration. So if I go ahead and attack here, then I'm not going to lose any duration on the field, which I'll show you in just a second. Here we go, taking a look, and we still have 2 turns on the cycle of life here. This is very powerful, and you can see here that my Luocha is already halfway to getting his ultimate once again. This means that you can have way higher uptime on the cycle of life field, and it's going to be active for a really good portion of the fight. It's going to be at minimum 66% uptime with a good rotation, and even more than that if you start getting hit or trigger his passive healing with his skill. When playing Luocha, try and avoid using his skill whenever he has his field active, as you really shouldn't need the healing from the skill, and you can kind of heal with other means on your team. Here, using the skill would be using a skill point, but also wasting the Abyss Flower stack, which I really do want later on. In this case, I can use my Silver Wolf's ultimate here to heal my Sele, no problems, and then I can use Luocha's basic attack to build up energy as well as also healing Sele. You can see here, I didn't need to use his skill at all. Remember to pay close attention to when enemies apply buffs to themselves and when you have things you can remove and things that can't be. You can see here this Blaze Out of Space here has an up arrow attack buff here, but also another buff here on them. These are divided into 2 separate categories, one of which Luocha can remove, one of which he can't. The buff here, Molten, which is a 30% increased attack boost, he can remove with his ultimate. But this other effect here, which is giving him a new attack mode, can't be removed. So even though I'm going to use the ultimate here, it won't take him out of his special mode, but it will remove the attack buff that is on him. There are 2 separate ways to look at rotations for Luocha. You can go with a proactive approach, which has a strict rotation and keeps the field up consistently and for the highest time possible, but has a pretty strict energy recharge requirement. Or you can go with a reactive approach, which has a very lax energy recharge requirement and only aims to heal when you need it, but has a much lower field uptime. The idea behind the proactive rotation is that you're able to keep your team healthy more consistently. You can do this using a fixed rotation, which you're going to repeat every single turn, which will maintain the field for a specific amount of time, meaning your team will never dip below a certain amount as long as you're attacking consistently. It also doesn't rely on activating the skill automatically when an ally falls below 50% HP, and it doesn't rely on any of the energy you get from that either. So it's going to be up 100% of the time, every single time, consistently. The ideal rotation in order to achieve this is using 2 basics and then a skill followed up by an ultimate. The 2 basics will generate energy while the field is active, and then as soon as it wears off after those 2 basics, you can use the skill and an ultimate to refresh it straight away. This will give you a roughly 66% uptime on the field in combat, and only leave a little bit of time where your team isn't being permanently healed. Now, using this rotation, if you do automatically trigger the skill, or if you're using the trick to extend the duration of the field by activating the ultimate or skill on his turn, you're going to end up with some excess energy. Remember not to activate the ultimate unless you need the Abyss Flower, and don't cast the skill manually unless you need the Abyss Flower in order to trigger the field. If you follow those guidelines, you should have a pretty good uptime on your field using the proactive approach. The idea behind the reactive approach is that you don't try and trigger his field immediately and on cooldown. You instead hang on to it and use basic attacks as much as possible, and only trigger it with the skill or ultimate when you absolutely need the healing for your team. This approach also relies more heavily on Luocha's passive activation of his skill to get a little bit more healing out of him as well. This approach is much better for skill point economy and also doesn't have any strict energy recharge requirements, so it can be definitely a very viable option and it can be pretty good as well, but you are sacrificing field uptime, consistency, and keeping your team alive at maximum HP at all times. The decision is yours. We'll be covering both of them in this video. It's really going to come down to which light cones and planar ornament sets you want to go with, which dictates which one you'll end up having access to. Let's cover his sets first. Luocha has 2 options for his main sets. He can either use a 4-piece Musketeer of Wild Wheat, or a 2-piece Musketeer of Wild Wheat and a 2-piece Passerby of Wandering Cloud. Both are good. The 2-piece is going to grant more healing, but the 4-piece Musketeer of Wild Wheat will grant additional speed. I personally recommend the 4-piece Musketeer of Wild Wheat myself. Next up is planar ornament sets, and Luocha has 3 really good options available to him. He has a selfish one, a team-based one, and an energy recharge one. If you want to maximize Luocha's personal potential, go with Space Stealing Station. It grants him a ton of attack, and that attack translates to more healing and more damage. If you're interested in a more team-focused playstyle though, the Fleet of the Ageless can also be a really good option. It grants the entire team of attack instead of just Luocha, and he'll still get some benefit. It also grants him some much needed HP to tank him up a little bit. Finally, there is the Sprightly Von Wag, which gives him a good amount of speed, but also is going to give him some much needed energy recharge rate. Depending on whether you need this or not is going to come down to what light cones you have at your disposal, and also how confident you are in hitting a 3-action rotation and how much that matters to you. If you don't mind not getting it sometimes, you might not need this, but if you do want to get it every time, you're definitely going to want to look at this. Experimental players and theory crafters may also be interested in looking at the Thief of Shooting Meteor for break effect, as well as Talia Kingdom of Banditry. Luocha does have access to some pretty good breaking, and he's also the imaginary type, which is an insane breaker when it comes to break effect. Those aren't recommended, but they can be good, interesting things to look at. I personally recommend, and I'm going to run, a 4-piece Musketeer of Wild Wheat, as well as the Fleet of the Ageless Planar Sphere, but I'd also consider running Sprightly Von Wag if I needed the energy recharge. Next up is Luocha's best in slot Relic main stats. Remember to get the main stats right before you start worrying about sets and substats. First and foremost, his body armor should have outgoing healing boost on it. If you can't get that though, you can grab attack in the interim, but outgoing healing is going to be best in the long term. Next up is boots. You're absolutely going to want speed as he is a healer and a support. But if you can't get that straight away, you can also use attack in the meantime. For his planar sphere, get attack. And if you can't get that, you can also use one with some reasonable substats on it, but attack is recommended. For his linked rope, make sure to grab energy recharge rate. If you can't get that in the interim, you can also use attack, but energy recharge is pivotal in terms of executing his 3-action rotation. When it comes to substats, there's only really 2 that Luocha is looking for, and that is attack and speed. Attack is going to increase his healing across the board, and you should definitely prioritize it. But speed is going to increase his ability to generate skill points, break, and also the consistency of getting his free cooldown on his heal back in action for his skill. Both of them are very important and are equally things you should look out for. When it comes to other substats you might be interested in though, after you have those as much as you can also go ahead and take a look at picking up some defensive stats like defense and HP. Effect resistance isn't needed as one of Luocha's bonus abilities grants him essential immunity to crowd control. You can also look into break effect if that's interesting to you and you want to use Luocha to break for imaginary. To sum that up, it's speed and attack equally, and then some defensive stats or break effect. Next up is light cones. We're going to be covering both the proactive and reactive light cones for Luocha. First up is proactive. If you're interested in the 3-action rotation, you're going to need a total of 15% energy recharge, assuming you've already got a maxed out gold energy recharge rope. Now, with this energy recharge, you can get it from a combination of places. Let's assume you get 5% from a sprightly Von Whack, you'd need to get 10% more from your light cones. To make it simple, let me give you guys a brief overview. His signature can be used without sprightly Von Whack to get the 3-action rotation. An S2, S3, or S4 post-op compensation in combination with sprightly Von Whack can achieve the 3-action rotation. And an S5 post-op compensation can achieve it without sprightly Von Whack. All other light cones you use should not use sprightly Von Whack, as none of them can achieve the 3-action rotation without getting hit in combat. However, that's not a problem because you can position Luocha next to the tank or just hope he gets hit and then you'll be able to achieve that action rotation anyway. But you won't be able to achieve it consistently unless you do get hit. Overall, that's not a big issue and it's not going to make the character unplayable, it's just going to make him feel a little bit less smooth, but it's definitely still a very strong character, and there's some pretty good gains to be made by using other light cones. So if you have post-op compensation at S2+, it's a very good option for him, and at S5, it's even better. It's got good base attack, and overall, it's going to be a decent option. Luocha's signature grants him enough energy without the sprightly Von Whack, which is insane, also grants him attack, but also speeds up the entire team every time he uses his ultimate. It's by far his best in slot, and is incredible if you can get your hands on it. You don't need any higher superpositions though, S1 is just fine. Now those light cones are insane for the proactive approach and getting the energy recharge you need, and his signature is definitely best in slot for the reactive playstyle as well. But let's talk about some light cones which don't adhere to those strict energy recharge requirements and which are going to be good all around for Luocha when you're not too worried about that stuff. The first one I'd look into is Shared Feeling. This light cone has a pretty good amount of basic attack, which is really important for Luocha, but also increases outgoing healing by 10% across the board. This is pretty important because Luocha has big base healing amounts, and this is going to increase it by a pretty good amount. In addition to that, it also grants 2 energy to the entire team at S1 and 4 at S5, and that will trigger when he uses his skill, which is important to his rotation, but also when he automatically triggers his skill, which is a neat little trick. Unfortunately, this light cone doesn't give you enough energy to achieve the 3-action rotation at this stage. The next light cone to consider is Perfect Timing. This one also has good base attack and also grants increased outgoing healing. The only catch is you need to get 30% increased effect resistance on your gear or substats in some way, shape or form. You can do this pretty easily on substats, you only need speed and attack so it's not too difficult to get this, and it can be a pretty good option if you do. If you have higher superposition levels though, you'll need more and more effect hit rating to hit the amount of outgoing healing that you can potentially get. Definitely a pretty good option. The last option I present to you guys is Quid Pro Pro. It gives you a pretty good amount of attack, and whenever Luocha has his turn, he's going to grant a random ally 16 energy, but it can't be himself, so it can't help you with your energy problems unfortunately. But it definitely is a pretty good option and a very nice supporting light cone, which gives you some good attack. However, it won't boost his healing in any way, but he kind of doesn't need that as he heals so much already, so it's definitely on the table as an option you guys can pursue. Finally, an honorary mention, Multiplication, a 3-star light cone which everyone should have at S5, can grant you a ridiculous amount of speed. However, because it has such a low basic attack, unfortunately, unlike other healers, Luocha can't take advantage of this one, so while it's good and you could in theory use it, it's definitely going to hurt your overall outgoing healing, so it's definitely not advised, but it is there if you need something desperately. Another honorary mention is Time Waits for No One. If you have it, it's pretty good. It's essentially better than the 3 other options I talked about which are 4-star, but because it's a 5-star, it's pretty out of reach. I wouldn't go out of your way to pick this up for Luocha, but it is definitely usable on him nonetheless, and it does give you some good outgoing healing and has some pretty good base attack. But definitely not something you need absolutely at all. To sum it up for you guys, Luocha's best in slot light cones are as follows. His signature is by far the best and crushes the competition. With it active, you don't need the sprightly Von Whack and you can hit the 3-action rotation on top of getting a ton of other free stats. Next up in line is S2 plus post-op compensation in combination with the sprightly Von Whack. If you can get S5, you can drop sprightly Von Whack, which is a big boost. Next up, you can choose either Shared Feeling, Perfect Timing, Quid Pro Quo, or Time Waits for No One. All of them are good and use whichever one you have at the highest level. If you don't have any of those though, you can use Multiplication. Luocha's Eidolons are up next, and I'm pleased to report that you don't need any of these Eidolons at all to make him a completely beastly healer capable of being incredibly powerful. But there's definitely some nice bonuses here, so let's cover them nonetheless. Luocha's Eidolon 1 grants everyone 20% attack while the field is active, and we know we can keep it active a pretty damn high amount of the time, so this is going to increase his own healing but also the damage of the entire team. Definitely a nice Eidolon, but nothing insane. Luocha's Eidolon 2 is a boost to his skill. It affects the skill if it's active when you're using it with skill points or when you trigger it passively with the free activation. What it does is it increases the healing output of the skill when used on an ally who's below 50% HP, which is definitely very nice. If it's used on an ally who's above 50% HP, it'll actually apply a shield to them, and it's a pretty big shield as well, so that's definitely pretty handy as well. Just note with characters such as Blade coming out, you don't necessarily want to shield them, so that is definitely something to consider. This Eidolon is definitely a pretty big power boost, but most of Luocha's healing actually comes from his field, so it's definitely not necessary by any stretch of the imagination, and the shield is definitely the most enticing part, as you will be using the skill pretty often when allies aren't damaged that much when you're trying to maintain the field overall. Luocha's Eidolon 4 provides a ton of damage reduction to the team. It debuffs the entire enemy with a 12% damage reduction and makes it so you won't be taking anywhere near as much damage, but only while his field is active. But that's not really too much trouble because we keep the field active for so long. It's definitely not game breaking, but it's a very nice bonus. Luocha's E6, like all 5-star E6s, is completely crazy. When Luocha uses his ultimate, he applies a 20% resistance reduction to all enemies for 2 turns. And you don't need to use any effect hit rating either because it's fixed chance, not base chance. To give you guys an idea, this is basically like implanting a vulnerability on every enemy with Silver Wolf at once with Luocha's ultimate. It's insanely powerful, but of course it's Eidolon 6, so it better be. Overall, definitely not needed, but it turns him into a very crazy support while also being a crazy healer. Pretty impressive. When it comes to team building with Luocha, you can pretty much use him in any team composition. Because he's such a powerful healer, similar to Bailu, he can solo sustain a team without the need for a tank or another supporting defensive unit. Now if things get super hairy, you might want to pair him with one, but he's definitely very good by himself. Of course, with all team building though, there are some characters that work better with Luocha than others, even though he's incredibly generic. Due to the way that Luocha heals, with most of it coming from his field, and all of the healing coming when allies attack, you want allies that attack a lot. The more you attack with your allies, the more healing you're gonna get, and as a result, the safer you're gonna be. So characters that attack frequently are preferred. Carries like Sele, who attack a lot and very quickly, are definitely very strong. Every time she attacks, she heals the entire team with the field active. Very, very powerful. In addition to that, when using supports with Luocha, you're going to want to go ahead and use some Nihility characters if you can, because most of their damaging abilities actually come from attacking the enemy instead of buffing allies. And attacking, like we learned, is going to heal instead of not heal. So Nihility definitely has an upper hand when paired with Luocha when you want to maximize his field's healing. Some good characters to consider here are Pella and Silver Wolf. Fortunately for Luocha, there are actually some Harmony characters that work very well with him though, despite not attacking very often. Bronya is a character that is going to be focusing on buffing your main damaging character, but she also has an ultimate which grants the entire team attack. Luocha scales off of attack, so Bronya actually will be buffing his healing capabilities even though she's not attacking that much herself, meaning she's actually a pretty good synergistic unit to pair with Luocha. Another thing to consider when team building for Luocha are characters that have incredibly powerful follow attacks. As mentioned earlier, follow attacks count for the field. A character like Clara, when combined with Luocha, kind of creates an invincible fortress. The field is active most of the time, and whenever Clara gets attacks, she'll counterattack, and that will in turn trigger the field. So any damage she just took, she'll heal straight back, and she'll also heal the rest of the team as well. This is a very powerful interaction. You can also achieve an identical reaction with March 7th, and she's a free-to-play unit, and she actually attacks 2 times per counterattack every single action. This is very strong, and pairing either of these characters with Luocha is going to create an indomitable fortress of healing and counterattacks. A very powerful combination indeed. The final tip for you guys is if you are playing Luocha with a tank like Japad, Fireman character, or Clara, position Luocha next to that character. Because they will get attacked a lot, and a lot of attacks are AoE attacks, Luocha will end up getting hit and gain energy from that. If you're not using one of the 2 energy recharge light cones to achieve the 3 action rotation, this is a very good way to cheat that without having to get those light cones. You're going to get a ton of free extra energy, and as a result you're going to be able to keep your field up for longer and more consistently, and you're going to be breaking a lot more with those ultimates as well. On average, Luocha should definitely be tanky than your average DPS, so I definitely think he can take the heat, and you're just going to get some pure upside. Luocha is a phenomenal healer with a lot of insane synergies, and it only looks like he's going to be getting even more in the future. On top of that, he's also got a lot of tricks up his sleeve, which makes him really strong with his D-spells and his purges on the enemy. Overall, I think he's a fantastic character. Hopefully you guys learned a thing or two and enjoyed the builds, and of course if you did, make sure to subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out. But until next time, hope you guys enjoyed. Cheers!